I was scheduled to be back in St. Louis the next day, and I drove back. And I drove with my friends, about a 15-hour drive. And that whole drive back, I came to realize the depth of the situation. So we were talking about it the whole time. And people were calling me from St. Louis. People, you know, I know people all throughout the city, from politicians to people like Tefpo. I didn't know Tef at the time, but I knew artists. Everybody was calling me like, man, you gotta get back here. This is about to go down, right? And I actually spent that whole time on the phone, 15 hours, just hearing the emotions in people's voices. A friend called me and he broke down and cried. Talking about he has to live in this community, and he has children, and you're in a place where you're scared for your children to step outside the front door to leave for school in the morning, because you don't know if these police officers see them as predators, see them as potential violent criminals, and they could lose their life in the same way at any time. So the idea that leaving his body out there on the street was a message to the community is really struck home to me, because the community got that message. People were in tears. People were mentally just in a very difficult space because the message was conveyed. And so when you see the anger that people felt, people out in the streets in the thousands, all those people were reacting to that message, which got through to them. And so by the time I got to St. Louis, which was the next day towards the evening, first thing I did, I went out there and I experienced it. I had everything happen. I got tear gassed.
You got tear gassed?
Yeah, I got tear gas out there. Everybody, I have asthma also, so tear gas is a real risk. There's some people out there who got tear gas, and they were tough. They just stayed there, and yeah. I got tear gas. I was out of there, right? I was in my car, and that was it. Yeah, I got tear gassed. I was out there in the good times when the police on a Thursday finally pulled Chief Jackson, and it looked like there was gonna be some sort of end to the hostilities. I was there the next day when they released the video and ignited a new rush of violence. I was there most of those nights, every single day, and it transformed me forever, because I saw things I'd never seen in my life before. I saw people with the courage to stand up to police. Police had guns in their faces. Police had, they were shooting tear gas at them. They were shooting rubber bullets. You didn't know they were rubber bullets when they were shooting. They would just start popping off. They were people who would, they would be shouting at the police shouting back. And people were just willing to die. People were willing to put themselves on the line. I was brought to tears every night during that protest, because I saw immediately that it was the equivalent to what happened in Selma. It was the equivalent to the people who were facing water hoses and tear gas to try to end segregation. These people were fighting for racial justice. They were there for that reason. People try to create this narrative that they're rioters and looters, but they were citizens who were willing to put their own lives on the line for racial justice. And as someone who writes about it and reads about it, I know my heroes, Malcolm X, Derek Bell, all these people I admire who put themselves on the line for it, I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, do I really stand for what I want to stand for? Compared to these people who hadn't read all those fancy books, who hadn't gone to fancy schools, but were willing to say, I'm going to put everything on the line right now. One of the things I'll never forget, the first night of the curfew, I think it was a Saturday night, and the curfew was at midnight, and the people were out there, and you're out there at 10 o'clock, and everybody's talking. People at the QT, the Quick Trip, which has been burnt out by that time, and people are milling around and protesting. Then it becomes 10:30. People are still out there. It becomes 11 o'clock. People are still out there. It becomes 11:30. Then the conversation starts getting a little bit more heated. You know, some people are starting to leave. People going around imploring others to leave. You had some of the older folks begging some of the younger folks to go home. Come up to 11:45. Some people have left. The people who are there are trying to explain why they're about to do what they're about to do. And I heard some of the realest political discussions and analyses that I've ever heard in my life, because these people felt it in their heart. Like it was 11:50, 11:55, and they were gonna stay there till the curfew. They didn't care what happened, because for them, this was gonna be something that would make their life significant. Because I heard a lot of people saying, well, I'll get beat up already. I could get shot already by the police. If I go down like this, then it's gonna mean something. People were willing to take that risk. It wasn't just the shooting by the police that they were willing to risk. They were willing to risk arrest. They were willing to risk getting beaten, tasered. They were willing to risk all these different just inflictions of violence on themselves. And it took a lot, and it's something I admire, because it's a physical courage that you got to sort of see it to believe it. You know, you got to sort of see it with your own eyes to believe everyday people who are not people who are winning awards, not people who are on TV doing interviews, but you know, they didn't do it for the fortune or the fame or anything like that. There were people who just did it because they believed in their heart that this was right, and they were willing to put their bodies on the line for justice. And so that was so moving to me. You know, really, ever since then, it's been 100+ days, but it was those moments are the reason why, you know, I continue to try to, in addition to my day job, I think every day I've worked on these issues, because I think back to what they were willing to sacrifice. And I call myself someone who's committed to these things, and you can't look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm about human rights, I'm about racial justice, I'm about the struggle, and not just stand up. You know, for my whole life, I've been working on these issues. I feel like I've been putting this time in this place for this moment. People I've known for years in my life have been conversion here in Ferguson, and you know, it's a situation where everything around you is just screaming that you got to stand up, you got to be your best self. And so, like, those moments, I saw people really rise to the occasion. Everyday people, you know, your school bus driver, you know, a person who works at the gas station, just drop it and say, just, you know, this is it. And that's just transformative, seeing that sort of thing. So when things went down, people I known throughout the years of my life came to Ferguson, and a lot of them slept on my couch. And so one of the people who slept on my couch, her name was Jamye, and she worked at the U.S. Human Rights Network. And so she was there. They were talking about the first week. She also got tear gassed. And so me and her, you know, of course, I teach human rights law. She's at the U.S. Human Rights Network, and we began talking about it on my couch. And so that was pretty early time. And you know, we realized pretty early on that this was a human rights issue. It wasn't a civil rights issue. So that's sort of for me, that's when it started to be something that was rolling around in my head. And then later on, we had the more formal conversations take place. Mina, you know, I met Mina, I believe, before the U.S. Human Rights Network, you know, formally proposed the idea. But I talked about it with Jamye early on. So I would say those conversations were the birthing of it. But for me, it wasn't a hard decision, because again, Malcolm X is my hero. And he always said that we had to take the civil rights issues and turn them into human rights issues. And black people needed to take their case to the UN so that the world court, the court of public opinion throughout the world could be the place where we hold our reckoning on whether or not race in America is something that is being approached from a place of justice or injustice. And so, to me, I look to Malcolm X as the genesis of what Ferguson to Geneva ultimately meant. And all of us who have had a chance to actually fulfill his vision, we had to look back to that, because that's part of a long continuum of black people in America being willing to take it to the next step. You also, of course, someone who's had experience with that, taking it to the next step, seeing yourself as a global citizen, as somebody who's part of a global community, whose life matters not just in the radius of the few blocks where you are, but people throughout the world can relate and can resonate. And you're a human just like them. It's a huge thing. It's a huge shift, a huge paradigm shift. So I looked at Malcolm X, if you ask me, the genesis of Ferguson to Geneva. So that's what I would point to. So for me, I look at it from the perspective of things I've experienced. I've been tear gassed, I've been thrown in jail, I've had these hate mail, phone calls, emails, all of these assaults. Each time it happened to me, I realized what I was up against was not just a policy reform proposal that was being rejected, or a particular court case where the outcome was in doubt. It's not about one case, it's not about one policy. I believe that if I was to testify, I would say that I've experienced white supremacy in the United States since 2014. You elected a black president. I can tell you from firsthand experience that we have not made these forward steps that we pretend that we've made on race. And so I'm looking at what I experienced, and I compare that to things I've read in the 60s, and the 40s, and the 20s. I'm not seeing big differences. So my testimony would be that this is the first step in, or excuse me, not the first step, but the latest step in a long walk. And for me, it's about the global movement. So another hero of mine is Nelson Mandela. And I see how when they were fighting apartheid, they were fighting a deeply entrenched system of racial injustice. They had people from around the world to stand up on their behalf. And they had to do that because internally the politics were unmovable. So they had to go outside the country to get the power they needed to make real change. I feel like we're in the same exact position. I feel like domestically in the United States, it's hopeless. But if we get people from around the world to stand up on our behalf, we can stop racial profiling, police brutality, and that's what it's going to take. And it's almost the exact same situation. And so people who don't see it as that equivalent, they're living in the illusory sort of media-controlled reality that you'll see on CNN or MSNBC even, where they are presenting these liberal alternatives where it's just one problem. Ferguson is the outlier. Ferguson is this horrible place. Outside of this Ferguson place, America's not perfect, but nothing's as bad as Mike Brown and Ferguson. This is part of a system. Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, John Crawford, Oscar Grant, and I think it's going to happen again and again. These are not the last victims. And what we're seeing is that each time it happens, the response goes to another level because it's the beginning of a movement, which I think has to be a global movement.
Protect